All right, there you go, that's better. So, welcome to Practical Threat Hunting. My name's Grifter. I'll just jump into real quick who I am. I have enough information in this slide deck to run like 90 minutes, but we're not going to do that. I'll just get through as much as I can and then give the slides to the organizers later for a reference. So this is me. By day, I'm the global lead of active threat assessments for IBM X-Force, so that means I run IBM's threat hunting program around the world. But by night, I also run all the technical operations for the Black Hat security briefing, so I run the NOC at Black Hat. I'm also one of the main organizers of DEF CON, where I run all the contests and events at DEF CON. I speak at conferences around the world. I've written a few books. I just love security, right? Like those are things that make my mama proud. But in reality, it's just that I love security. I've been doing this a very long time. I would do it for free, but thankfully I don't have to. So we're just gonna jump straight into it. Like, what is threat hunting? So I've got a nice shiny definition up here that says hunting is proactively searching through data in order to detect threats which have evaded traditional security measures. And that's a great way to describe it to somebody who maybe is less technical or is unfamiliar with the security side of things. The reality is threat hunting is essentially doing incident response before you know that you're owned, right? It's a lot of the same types of techniques, a lot of the same types of investigations. You're just doing it prior to getting some indicator that you have an attacker in the environment. It's really hot up here and that guy's eating ice cream right in front of me. Just right in front of you. Man, it's messed up. but yeah, something to keep in mind is that while we are doing a lot of the same investigative processes that go on when you're doing incident response, hunting can then become incident response, right? We're going out and we're searching for something that is in the environment that clues us in that an attacker is there. And if we find that, if we find somebody, it means that it immediately turns into an IR scenario. So make sure that your hunters are familiar with what your incident response plans are, who to call, who to wake up, where to order pizza from, that kind of thing, so that if you do in fact find something, you know where to go from there. Hunting is also human-driven, right? This isn't another piece of software or some blinky box that a vendor sold us that we can put in an environment and say, we do threat hunting. It is, at least now, still requires a human to make this happen. These are people with a varied types of skill set and number of skill sets that go out and look for these things. It's proactive, right? So that means we're doing it before we get an alert. We're doing it, again, before there's something that tells us we should go do it. We're actually deciding, I'm gonna go out and look for attackers even though I don't have something telling me that I should. And it's iterative, it's not random, so it should be something that is repeatable. While you're going out there and clicking around and doing all these things and searching through stuff, you should be jotting down what your process was to get to whatever information it is that you find, so that you know when you find something interesting, oh, later, if I want to find this type of data, I go through these steps and then I can get that. It also helps you to be able to go ahead and create some type of maybe automation or script that will pull that same data back from you in the future. And I said automation, so let's talk about what hunting isn't. So it's not just hitting Control F and looking for an IOC, right? This isn't about going out and looking for, a host name, IP address, or a file hash and being like, oh, I got this threat intelligence that came in today with all these different feeds that we have, and I'm just gonna go search and see if I can find that IP address in the environment. That's not threat hunting, that's threat searching, that's Googling your environment for something that you got in a feed. It is not automated. This is not something, again, that you can just deploy a box and then go. You can automate certain aspects of it to make it so that your hunters have more actionable data, but it's not something that you can just push a button and it just goes and you're like, yeah, we're doing hunting. We feed our threat intelligence feeds into it and it goes out and searches for us. That's not threat hunting. It's also not new, right? Threat hunting as a practice with different frameworks and having like our arms wrapped around it has really been a thing for about 10 years. And But the reality is that we've been doing stuff like this forever, right? Back since 19 diggity, when you took a bunch of host names that your users were going to and you put them all in a spreadsheet and stack counted it to see what were the ones that were accessed the least number of times, looking for outliers. That's threat hunting. It just didn't have a name around it. So it's not new, and it's not wizardry, right? It's nice when you have somebody who is an expert on a vast number of different technologies, operating systems, networking, protocols, all those things, but it doesn't mean that they have to be all of that. You can take somebody who's just really good at one certain thing. Maybe they're good at a particular operating system, and you can say, I'm gonna have you hunt for things in that operating system, right? And so you can still gain value from junior analysts who have a high level of skill in only one area. It's nice to have somebody who can do it all, but it's not a requirement. So why are we doing it? Why are we hunting? Well, we're hunting to find previously undetected threats, right? We buy all these blinky boxes, we have all this software running, and it's supposed to tell us there's bad guys here. But the reality is sometimes it doesn't do that, right? And if the attacker is skilled enough, then they know how to hide from the things that we're buying off the shelf. What we're trying to do is reduce the dwell time that attacker is persisting in the environment so that we can hopefully avoid exfiltration of data, avoid a ransomware campaign, avoid credential harvesting, those types of things, right? So we want to make sure that they're in there for as short as possible. And if you're playing hide and seek with somebody, you actually should go seek, right? Another kind of, and what is probably the biggest hidden return on investment with threat hunting is that you are going to learn your environment better than you ever have before, right? Because you're going out and looking in all of these different areas, you're gonna see something that you go, why did we do it like that? Why did we use this protocol? Why is this application part of the golden image for these laptops? And when you start asking questions like that, you'll start to understand this is why we made this business decision, this is why we decided to do this is why IT decided to buy this solution, right? And it lets you understand how that organization lives and breathes, right? How that environment interacts with each other. And when you do that, that's when you can start to see things that are anomalous more easily, right? When you know how the environment is supposed to function and how the protocols that are in there are supposed to function, when something happens outside of the ordinary, it should jump out at you. I will say too, on that last point of the learning the environment, as somebody who's spent many years on the red team side, the offensive side of security, when you gain access to a new environment, those of you who are offensively inclined, you know that the first thing you do is try to learn everything you can about the environment so you can stay sticky, stay persistent. So the attacker is going to do that. They're going to learn as much about the environment as possible, so you should too. Another thing is it's not just about going and finding somebody who is there and is currently, did it just do it again? I just lost the screen, didn't I? We don't know why it's doing that, but I'll unplug it and plug it back in a few times and we'll just keep going. So what it's going to do is help you find misconfigurations in the environment so that you reduce the overall attack surface as well, right? So you're going to be going in and looking for things, and then while you're in there, you're like, oh, that's weird. This portion of the network can see something that this other one shouldn't. That's really odd. I want to make sure that we get that handled. And so you go to IT and you tell them, hey, this is wrong, or we need to get this shored up, or we haven't patched this area or these systems over here. And while you're doing that, you're just creating a more secure environment overall. So that should you end up in a situation where an attacker does target you, you have already fixed misconfigurations, you've already identified gaps, and you've reduced that attack surface for the attacker once they get there, right? Make lateral movement more difficult for them once they gain entry. Also, it just makes your analyst better, right? So it allows you to put yourself in an investigative mindset, or your analyst in an investigative mindset, and actually put to use the things that you're learning at conferences like this, or that you read in books, or the training classes that you go to, and you get to decide, like, okay, well, today I'm gonna go look for this. That's what hunting is. When you're going in and creating like a hypothesis where you're like, what am I going to look for today? What you normally would do is what I do when I go into an engagement with clients is I say, tell me everything about your environment, right? Give me all of the information that you can give me about it. What are the technologies? How is the network segmented? How does data flow in and out? What are the ingress, egress points for this environment? And then I say, okay, well, and this is where having some offensive background helps. I say, all right, well, if I was going to attack you, I would hit you here, here, and here. And if I was going to try to exfiltrate data from the environment, I would move it out here. So why don't we go look there? And you would be surprised, shocked how often you find things just by looking at that environment yourself and being like, if I was going to attack us, this is what I would do. So let me go see if somebody else got that idea already. Right? Now, this isn't like a super sexy part of hunting, but documentation matters, right? Writing things down matters. If we don't write down what we found, then we're not able to communicate to management why it's valuable for us to spend the time doing the hunting that we're doing, right? Like, we're not able to push to have more threat hunters come in or for new tools or those different things without writing all this stuff down. So what we want to write down are the gaps that we've identified, right? If we're missing potential areas that we should be logging, then let's get that done. Vulnerabilities that we discovered, and then how we resolved whatever it was that we found, right? If we say like, oh, the network segmented poorly, like I'm able to see this and this and this, so I worked with IT, we got it segmented better, this is what we did, I worked with this person, blah, blah, blah. Like write it all down so that when you say like, I want more hours to hunt and less time just taking tickets out of a queue, you have the data to back up why it's valuable to do that, right? What are the hypotheses that you came up with? And why were those important, right? What it made you think, oh, I want to go look here. So make sure that you're documenting the questions that you're asking as a team, right? I went and looked for this thing. This is why I thought it would be a good idea. Ultimately, it led to this, or it led to nothing, and that's valuable too. And having all of those things written down is great because when somebody goes to start a hunt later, they may look and say, oh, all right, somebody's done that. This is what they learned for it. I'm going to try it a slightly different way. Maybe I can get some different data, or they found something that was really interesting. Let's go ahead and replicate that hunt again. Also, what new alerts or detections did you find while you're out there doing your hunting? Did it mean that you discovered some new IOCs? So now you're able to create new alerts, stuff like that. And then also, of course, any incidents that you discovered, right? Was there an attacker in the environment? Was there a machine that was compromised? These are two things. One, super useful to the team as far as like a knowledge base, something that people can go back and refer to, but it's also great for when you have to do your end of year performance review and they say, what did you do this year? And you can be like, oh, I found this many misconfigurations in the environment. I worked with this team to get those resolved. I was able to work this many different, hypotheses to hunt with. I found this many new alerts that we put in. Like all those things are valuable for you personally as well. So there's value to the organization and value for yourself. So what do we want to do? Like what do we want to collect? What's the data that we're looking at? Well, we want to collect logs from key areas. And I say key areas, but in reality what I mean is all logs from everywhere, right? If it creates a log, log it. Storage itself is cheap. I realize that like some SIMs are really, really expensive to load every login, Splunk. But if you have logs and an incident kicks off later, if it turns out that you find yourself in a situation where you have been owned in some capacity, having logs even just written to disk somewhere and being able to hand those over to an incident response team and say, this is everything that I've got, even if you don't look at them, but please look at them, but even if you don't personally, if there is an incident that happens and a team comes in, you can hand that off to them and say, this is all the evidence that we have of what's been going on in the environment for as long as humanly possible, right? It's important when it comes to logging to understand that those logs are valuable to you personally and valuable to that team, right? But your Um, you want to bring in an outside team to take a look at them too. You've been looking at those logs forever, right? You look at them every day or however often it is that you're reviewing them. When an incident kicks off, it's important to have a second outside set of eyes come in and look those things over too. So if you don't have an IR retainer, get an IR retainer and have somebody come in and sit side by side with you when you do experience a breach. We also want network data. I mentioned, what are the ingress and egress points, right? How does data flow in and out of the environment? What are our subnets, right? What's the directionality? How is data flowing and what direction is it flowing? Not everybody sticks to RFC 1918, so if your environment, you're not doing that, let's make sure that we are doing that, or at least understand where we're not, because sometimes certain types of data flowing out you don't care about, but if that same type of connection was coming in, you'd freak out, right? So, and then also full packet capture. Now, full packet capture to me is like video surveillance for your network. We wouldn't build an office building today and then just be like, we don't really need cameras, it takes up a lot of storage and they're expensive and blah, 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 blah. That full packet capture is video surveillance for your network. It means that you're able to go in there, and if an attacker is in the environment, you can pull the tools that they uploaded into your environment out of that. You can pull them out of the stream, rebuild them, throw them in a sandbox, whatever malware it is, throw it in a sandbox. And if you are unfortunate enough to experience exfiltration, you can then rebuild the files that they took and understand what left your environment, right? And I have, multiple scenarios where knowing what left drastically changes the response to that incident, right? There's the difference between having to talk to the board about it and having to make some changes in the security program and ending up on the news, right? And then, of course, endpoint behavioral data. So understand what's going on the endpoints, what are all the processes, scheduled tasks and services, a registry access, any type of data on the endpoint. That's where rubber meets the road, right? So that is, if somebody is on a host, what is it that they're doing there? So being able to collect all that endpoint telemetry and see what it is that's taking place on those machines. All right, so where do we start? Well, the reality with threat hunting is it's about situational awareness. It's about understanding what normal looks like on your host and network, and then essentially creating a baseline of what normal is and diffing against that over and over and over again, right? And so you need to, at some point, decide that you don't believe that you have an attacker in the environment. So you're gonna wanna go out and do the hunting so you can make that call, right? You're gonna say, we don't believe there's an attacker here now, and now we can draw a line and say, we believe we're clean. Anything outside of this is not normal, right? So when you understand what normal is, what default good is, you're able to understand what bad is much more easily, because when something bad or anomalous happens, it should stick out to you. You should just be like, that's not like that, or that system never accesses that other system. Why is it suddenly deciding to do that? Or, wow, there's a massive amount of data being transferred by this department over here that's never done that before, right? So those outliers should really stick out. It is important to understand that outliers won't always be evil, right? But they should always be interesting. You may see something and say, oh, okay, well, that looks really scary to me. I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna do this investigation. You spend 2 to 3 hours working on something, and ultimately in the end, it's just, nope, that's how that protocol works in the environment. If you are comfortable with that, if you're like, well, I learned a thing, then hunting is for you, right? But if you're like, that sucks, I just wasted 3 hours, then maybe it's not, right? But you're going to learn about how protocols function. You're going to learn how they different operating systems interact with each other, and how the network data flows around. And it's a super educational thing. And this industry, we're constantly learning. So most of us should be fine with that. But just understand that just because something look weird, it doesn't mean it's going to be exfiltration to China every time. It just might be the fact that that's how IT set those systems up. And if you are fine with that, then you just keep moving on, essentially. Also, leave your preconceived notions at the door. Again, you don't want to start out with an IOC and be like, oh, this is the thing, and I'm going to go look for this. What you want to start out with is a question. So like I mentioned previously, if it was me and I was trying to exfiltrate data from our network, where would I try to sneak that data out and then go look for that, right? You should be doing hypothesis-driven hunts. There's a question, go prove out whether that thing that you're thinking may be happening is happening or not. All right. So from a mindset standpoint, right, you need to have a plan, but be ready to adapt. Know what you're looking for, and then go try to find it. Go see if that's out there. But don't be discouraged if it's not. You have to stay flexible as well, to where you may think this is what I'm going to hunt for today, and then at a certain point, something catches your attention, or the hair goes up on the back of your neck, then you full stop. Like, you're no longer hunting for the thing you started out with. Now you're focused on that, right? Because something, that gut feeling that you have, told you this is interesting. So make sure that in a situation where if you think for a second, well, that looks odd, start hunting on that thing that you thought that looks odd. And if you are in the middle of something you feel like you can't, just open another tab, keep that open, and you're not done with that hunt until you've closed all your tabs, essentially. Just be ready to pivot. You're going to pivot a lot. And then find the tools that help you make sense of the data that you have. We obviously have massive amounts of data. It's not getting any smaller. But you want to find tools, whether they're open source or vendor driven, that your team actually wants to use. If you hate the tool, you're just not going to use it. If it wasn't sized correctly for the environment, you're not going to use it because it's too slow. And when you're doing query after query after query and it's just grinding away, it is soul crushing. So find the things that work for you and for your environment and for your team, figure it out together, and then decide what it is that you're going to use to hunt with. And then document everything, right? Document everything that you're doing. If you found a cool hunt, if you found some cool data because of something you did, write it down, share it, tweet it, do a talk at a conference, whatever it is. Just go share the things that you're learning so that hopefully the thing that you figured out saves somebody from having their worst day ever. All right, so I talked about seeding or about hypothesis. How do we come up with that question? Well, what we want to do first is decide what's at risk, right? What is the type of industry that we're in? Am I in education? Am I in finance? Am I in energy? And then who are the groups that normally target that sector of business, right? And what are the risks to my applications and the data that I have based on that knowledge, right? For that group or for those groups, right, what are their probable attack vectors? How are they going to come at us, right? We know with actual valuable threat intelligence that the groups that are most likely to target, let's say, finance, have particular ways that they conduct those campaigns. So what are those, and are you able to see what their probable vectors are going to be? For those vectors, what are the techniques and artifacts that are left behind by those attacks, right? Again, valuable threat intelligence, not just IOCs that are like, host names, IP addresses, and file hashes, but TTPs, like tactics, techniques, and procedures that tell us this is the type of technique, this is the type of tool they're going to use, and this is the artifact that tool leaves behind. So for those artifacts, two things. What is the tool that created it, right? So what are the tools the attackers are using, but also what tools detect that type of artifact as well? Do you have the visibility into those things? And then write it down. I think we're sensing a theme here about writing things down. Write it all down, and then emulate it if you can. Red team, blue team this if you can. So now you know, okay, this is the group that's most likely to target me. These are the assets that they're going to be coming after, and that's why those are at risk. These are the types of attacks that they do. They use these tools to do it. Let's go out and emulate that with a red team exercise and see if our blue team can see all those things, or what are the artifacts that are genuinely left behind by doing those attacks. Can we see that in our tools that we have in our defenses, or can our hunters see that? And then rinse and repeat, right? Do it over and over and over again. One great place to get TTPs, of course, this wouldn't be a security talk without talking about MITRE ATT&CK. It's a great source of information for just, like, oh, okay, here's this group, here's what they're doing, these are the tools they use, these are the techniques that they're using. Go out there, comb through it. Sometimes I'll just go read random things in it because I'm a giant nerd. I imagine you are of the same mindset. So go through MITRE ATT&CK and look for those things. Another thing that's good to do is take MITRE ATT&CK and understand, okay, well, these are the attack vectors and these are the techniques they use. What type of visibility does it require to see that technique, and do we have the current visibility into that? And create something like this, like a heat map, a stoplight style. You can hand it to an executive and say, look, we're blind here, here, and here on these attack techniques that the most likely attackers to target us use. We need additional funding so that we can buy the tools so we have the visibility into these things. If not, we are exposed to these attacks that, again, we know that the most likely attackers to hit our organization use. And when you do that, it gives you the ammunition to go to them and say those things and go, give me the budget, otherwise we're blind. And that does two things. One, potentially it gets you budget or more resources, but also if you are unfortunate enough to experience a breach and then they pull you in and say, why didn't you find this? You can go back and point at something like this and say, do you remember back in October, I gave you this chart that said I was blind to these different types of attacks, and that if we were to purchase this software or deploy this solution, then we could see into that, and you said it wasn't in the budget? This is what happens, right? And then instead of getting fired, or a CISO getting fired, they can just go back to their desk, right? And you're like, have a good one. But this allows you, it gives you the ability to do that. You can say, I know that we're blind to these things, and in order to no longer be blind to that, I need additional hunters, I need additional solutions, those types of things. So I mentioned red teaming. I'll just quickly touch on this. Red team means different things to different people. Saying pen test means different things to different people. So really quickly, there are differences, right? A vulnerability scan is just a piece of software where you click a button and it goes, and it comes back and delivers you a report that says, I found things that were bad. You should patch these things. Those are bad. And then there's a little logo in the corner, and some companies will do a vulnerability scan, change the logo on the report, and then deliver it to them and be like, that'll be $10,000, right? That doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, but some companies do it. An actual pen test is a skilled professional, not a piece of software, or several skilled professionals. A pen test is like a numbers game, right? You're trying to figure out as many ways as you can get in, and if you find things, you may continue to exploit those to see how far you can get in how many different ways. Red teaming is a little bit different. That's where you are actually emulating an attacker, or you have a set goal, right? The goal is, admin on Active Directory or something like that, right? This is the goal, root on this machine over here, and this is how we're gonna get to it. And we're gonna try to go in as stealthy as possible and get to whatever that goal is. A red team should be using threat intelligence to emulate whatever group they're doing. So again, if you know these are the 5 most likely groups to target you, you should be doing red team exercises where you're like, today, this week or month or whatever it is, this red team exercise we're conducting is going to be, APT whatever, and that's what we're gonna do. And when you make sure that your blue team can see everything that the red team did or isn't missing stuff, then you move on to the next group and the next group and the next group. I threw in here as well bug bounty programs just because it can be a great source of low-cost testing, but it can be noisy as well when you put out there like, hey, do you want some money? If you find a thing, now suddenly every kid in their parents' basement is throwing stuff at your website or doing whatever, trying to see if they can do it. So it can generate noise. All right, on the actual practical hunting side of things, I will say that when you are hunting, you want to start small and build layers. There are layers that are built into a hunt. Things that are maybe benign on their own, when when put together with other things, suddenly become more interesting, right? Like, we might not care that there's direct to IP communication to a machine somewhere, but if that, it's direct to IP, great on its own, that doesn't mean anything. Oh, it's to a region or a country that we don't normally do business with. Well, okay, well that adds another layer, whatever. Oh, it's using, encrypted communication. It's happening outside of these different hours. You get what I'm saying? Like, as we're doing different things, suddenly it gets more and more important as each layer gets added to it. So we want to look in our logs for process creation. Now, sure, that could be overwhelming, right? We're clearly not going to alert every time a process is created, but what we can do is say, these are the processes that kick off across all 10,000 machines in our environment. However, we have 5 machines that only have this process. There's one process that only exists on 5 out of 10,000 machines. What the hell is that process, right? And it may turn out to be completely normal. Maybe they're just running a piece of software no one else in the organization runs. But it also could be that they're running a piece of malware that no one else in the organization is running, right? So that is the kind of thing that I mean. On its own, process execution means nothing. Process creation means nothing. But when you look across your entire organization and you see that only a couple of people are running a certain process, just go investigate, see what it is and why. And then if it's fine, add it to an allow list. And if not, now you've got something interesting to look for. Make sure that processes match your names of your allowed software, right? Verify that those file hashes are known good executables for the software that you are using, right? So if you have the ability to do this, this is great. It's a bit much, but it helps. And then while you're doing these things, try to look at a 24-hour window. When I'm going out and hunting, I look at a 24-hour window and I go, okay, let me see what task, what process, what action only took place, within once or twice during that 24-hour window across the organization, or potentially if it's a user, then I'll be like, oh, this guy did something weird within this 24-hour period. Now let me expand to 7 days. Is he still weird? Yeah, he's still weird. Let me expand to a month. All right, let's look at everything this user has done for the last month, right? So you start out with 24 hours because it makes it so it's easy for you to go and hunt through, and if you find something interesting, expand from there. We've all done things like this, right? Like if we are looking at the processes running on our own machines, you open up your task manager and you're looking at processes and you're like, the hell is that, right? And so you go and Google it, and then you're like, oh, I don't like that at all. Like, what is that, right? And then you go in and maybe you create a hash and throw it into VirusTotal, or you drop it into a sandbox you have, the executable, and see what it does. Like, we've all kind of done those things naturally as geeks. This is the same thing, just on a much larger scale. One thing that you can do is, I mentioned automation earlier. Again, you can't automate your hunt, but you could create a report that says, every day at 8 a.m. I want a report delivered to me for the last 24 hours that tells me what outlier processes exist within this organization, right? So, and then again, you're just ranking those based on how often they happen. So it's like, okay, well, we know that we've got these 6 processes to go and investigate, and that may seem like heavy lifting at first glance, but as you do it, there are gonna be days where there is nothing new, right? And then, one day it'll come in and now there's a new process that you need to look at that is the first time it's shown up in your organization, and you're just gonna go and look and see what it is, right? So just have a report that you send to yourself every day to go look through. Look at parent and process relationships, right? So if command.exe is running WinWord or PowerShell is making outbound connections, things like this, like what is happening? What are those things kicking off? Understanding those things are great to look for. Things like SVC host being launched by anything other than services.exe, processes that are missing company names and product versions. This could be just a lazy developer. Sometimes that's the case. But again, when you do this initially, if you're starting a hunt program, you're going to have a lot of this stuff to look through, and you're going to be like, that's not there, that's not there, that's not there. But as you add things to allow lists, there'll be less and less of this to do. And every time this occurs, it will become more actionable, right? So that's what we're trying to get to, is actionable data. So Noisy in the beginning, but as you filter through it, you'll gain more and more actionable data as time goes on. Things like looking for similar or processes that have similar names to legitimate processes. This is where something like a string similarity algorithm is good, where it's like, oh, okay, I want to see everything that's out there. This is where you're looking for stuff like Mozilla with a 0, that type of thing. Actually, I'm going to say it, AI. AI is good for stuff like this, where you can just say, hey, here's all the processes that exist in my entire environment. This is what we said is normal. This is what I saw today. Anything look weird to you in there? Like it's great for stuff like that. Processes starting in odd locations. Scripting, this is another one that in the beginning, it's going to take a little bit of legwork to be like, okay, who's running, WScript, or who's using PowerShell? And as you're figuring that out for the environment and you're adding people to an allow list, you can say, all right, well, I know that this guy uses scripting, this guy uses PowerShell for this, but if suddenly like Kevin in accounting, who's never done any kind of scripting before, starts using PowerShell, what the hell is Kevin doing, right? Why? He's not an IT, he's not an admin, he's not doing whatever. Why did Kevin suddenly get interested in PowerShell? It's stuff like that, right? Things, again, anomaly, behavioral oddities that we're looking for. Encoded commands, like what are they encoding? Why are they encoding it? Why are they invoking encoded commands? And then just some advice when it comes to scripting in an organization, come up with a naming convention and stick to that. If an attacker doesn't know the naming convention for the scripts and they go to use something, whatever, you can create an alert that just says, like, we saw this, it's outside of the naming convention, and you go and take a look at it. Again, this is all about finding things that give you something to go and look for. Users being added to privileged groups. So figure out, when does this happen? Does it happen on a normal schedule? Is there something where IT goes in and says, oh, we're going to add people to these things today, we're going to create these roles? And if that doesn't exist, ask them if they can do that. Be like, hey, can you just create, or add people to new groups from this hour to this hour on Mondays or on Fridays or whatever it is, and then you can be like, anything outside of this is weird, right? So working with IT, I know security can be a pain in the ass for IT teams. This is where we're just trying to work together to be like, look, here's what our goal is, we know what your goal is, can we figure out a way to work together to make it so that I know when something weird is happening? And then this one is important for me. It's just collecting bash history. So if you are watching an attacker, basically you look at the bash history and you can see what they're doing. You get kind of an idea about what it is that they're trying to do, as well as generally like how skilled that attacker is, because you can see what it is that they're doing at the CLI. What is also interesting about this is that I know that, like, again, from coming from the offensive side of the house, that like if I gained access to a machine, I was also looking at the bash history because it gave me an idea about what that machine was used for, right? Like, so you go in and you look at the last 50 commands that were thrown at it, you get an idea about, oh, this machine does this machine does whatever, right? So bash history is an important one. Look for things that are signs of internal reconnaissance. So these are, again, commands that are normally run by IT or administrators, but aren't run by Kevin in finance. Why is Kevin running Who Am I? Why is he looking at IP config? Why is he doing those things? That's not something somebody who works in the finance department should do. Or things that just shouldn't be run at all. Basically anything in a Kali distro, but if you see Kevin in finance who is running Nmap, what the hell is Kevin doing? For signs of lateral movement, look for new user and endpoint pairs, right? So a user logs into a machine they've never logged into before. Those credentials have never been used on that machine before. Why? Like, why is this person logging into this machine? Also look for new endpoint to endpoint pairs. If there is a machine that is now connecting to a department or a server or something else it's never connected to before, why is it doing that? Why is it connecting to these things that suddenly it's interested in and in the last 3 years has never been interested in? Again, could be totally benign, but it gives us somewhere to start. Look for users that are running programs or connecting to things and immediately logging in with other credentials. It's not something that's normal. It's normal for us. It's normal for us as admins to do things like that, but it's not normal for your average everyday user. And of course, look for log tampering as well. I have so much more that I can go into. I mean, oh, it just turned off again. That's my get off? Is that what you're trying to do? You're trying to tell me to leave? No. Here, I will. It's not coming back. There we go. I'll skip through this. I'll get to the last slide here and just say, again, I'll provide the slides. You can look at them later as a reference. Encrypted traffic, you can still hunt in. Don't just think that, oh, it's encrypted, this is game over. You can gain a lot of intelligence just by looking at the source and destination, session size, what type of ciphers they're using. All that stuff is really interesting. So save the metadata for encrypted traffic and see what you can infer from looking at that. You know, JAW3 allows us to have a higher confidence in what those applications are, the client-server communication is, so focus on things like that. But the reality is, if you're in an organization right now that's not doing decryption for the traffic that you are responsible for, it's time to start looking. At Black Hat, clearly we don't do any decryption because we have, you know, our customers, our clients, our attendees are you, right? And we don't want to look at your stuff. Gross. When you're looking at your organization, you're going to want to start looking at that. We're seeing on average 70 to 80% of traffic is now encrypted on networks, and that means you're 70 to 80% blind. I will say just a little advice from Grifter. If some security vendor offers you something in a tool that they're selling you and says, oh, if you check this box, we'll do decryption, that will bring whatever platform that is to its knees from a performance standpoint if it's not sized correctly, and they may just want to sell you more. So take a look at a standalone solution that does decryption, and just it might be worth it for you to do that, but it's really time to start looking. And with that, thank you. I don't have any time for questions, I don't think, but I'll be right out here, so if somebody wants to ask me something, I'll be hanging around. Thanks again.